Have you ever stopped to think about what single number has the power to influence whether you buy a car, save for the future, or even whether a business decides to hire new people? It's not some secret code. It's the interest rate. It's one of the most powerful, yet kind of misunderstood forces shaping our financial lives and really the whole global economy. So let's unpack how it all really works.
It all boils down to a pretty simple question we ask ourselves all the time. Should I spend this money now, or should I save it for later? And it turns out the answer, more often than not, is being gently pushed one way or the other by that one little number.
Okay, so let's bring this right down to you and me, our own finances. The easiest way to think about interest rates is like a constant tug-of-war on your wallet. It's always pulling you between that instant gratification of spending and the future security you get from saving.
This breaks down that tug-of-war perfectly. So on one side, when interest rates are high, your savings account suddenly looks awesome. Your money is actually earning you more money, which makes you want to save. But at the same time, taking out a loan for a car or a house gets more expensive. So the incentive is super clear. Save more, borrow less. On the flip side, when rates are low, the opposite is true. Your savings are earning, next to nothing, so why let your cash just sit there? And borrowing is cheap, which makes those big purchases feel a lot more doable. The whole incentive structure just flips. Save less, borrow more.
Now, this isn't just psychology. There's actually a whole economic theory behind this, and it comes from the work of John Maynard Keynes. He gave us these two fancy-sounding concepts. Your marginal propensity to consume, or MPC, is basically your gut impulse to spend any extra cash you get, and your marginal propensity to save, or MPS, is that other impulse to squirrel it away. Interest rates? There's a huge factor in which one of those impulses wins.
Let's make this real. Imagine a surprise $500 bonus lands in your bank account. If interest rates are super low, your savings account is offering a tiny return. Maybe you decide, you know what, I'm going to spend that $500, or maybe even use it for a down payment and borrow more while it's cheap. But if rates are high, putting that same $500 into a high-yield savings account could give you a really nice return. All of a sudden, saving it becomes the much smarter move.
Okay, so this isn't just about your bonus. When you multiply that individual choice by millions and millions of people, it becomes this incredibly powerful economic force. And it's a force that central banks are always trying to control. They use interest rates as their main lever to steer the entire economy.
Here in the United States, that job falls to the Federal Reserve. You've probably just heard it called the Fed. So when you hear on the news that the Fed raised rates or the Fed cut rates, what they're doing is actively pulling that economic lever, trying to either speed things up or slow them down. So what's their goal exactly? Well, the Fed is guided by something called its dual mandate. It has two main jobs, and they can sometimes conflict with each other. First, keep as many people employed as possible. Second, keep the prices of everything stable. In other words, control inflation. It's a really delicate balancing act.
Now, the textbook theory is pretty straightforward. If the Fed wants to get more people working, it lowers interest rates. The idea is that this makes it cheaper for businesses to borrow money to, say, build a new factory, invest in new tech, and, crucially, hire more workers. More spending, more investment, more jobs. Simple, right?
Well, this is where that simple theory crashes into messy reality. The relationship between interest rates and the economy, especially unemployment, is just not a perfect, predictable machine. It's way more complicated than that.
This quote from economist Christopher Thornberg just nails it. The Fed doesn't operate in a bubble. It's usually cutting rates because the economy is already in trouble. It's a reaction to a crisis, and during a really bad downturn, things like widespread fear and uncertainty can be way more powerful than cheap money.
I mean, the Great Recession is the perfect and honestly painful example. Just look at this timeline. Starting in 2007, the Fed saw big trouble on the horizon and started aggressively cutting interest rates. They took them from over 5% all the way down to basically zero by the end of 2008. Now, according to the theory, this should have stopped the bleeding. But it didn't. Unemployment absolutely skyrocketed.
And the result? Even with that interest rate lever pushed all the way to the floor, the unemployment rate still hit a staggering 10% in October 2009. The economic engine had just stalled. When businesses are failing and people are losing their jobs left and right, the incentive of a cheap loan just isn't enough to get them to borrow and spend.
And hey, this wasn't just some one-off event. We saw a very similar pattern play out in 2020. As the COVID-19 pandemic shut down the entire global economy, the Fed slashed rates to zero again, but unemployment still spiked dramatically. It proved, once more, that when you're facing these massive economic shocks, interest rates have their limits.
So to really understand the complex role that interest plays today, we need to look back, and I mean way back, because for most of human history, charging interest wasn't an economic policy tool. It was considered a moral failing, a sin even.
For literally thousands of years, across different cultures and religions, the practice of lending money and charging for its use had a very specific name: usury. And it was universally condemned as one of the absolute worst crimes you could commit. And the opposition was just everywhere. We're talking about the foundational figures of Western thought: prophets, philosophers, priests, poets. They were all in agreement that usury was just fundamentally wrong.
I mean, just think about how intense that condemnation was. In his epic poem, The Inferno, the poet Dante creates this incredibly detailed map of hell. And in his moral universe, users were punished more harshly than murderers. He put them in a deeper, more terrible circle of hell. Just let that sink in.
The Hebrew prophet Ezekiel was just as stark. He lists usury among a collection of what he calls abominable things, and that list includes the most heinous crimes you can imagine. That's how seriously people took this.
The philosopher Aristotle is the one who really gave the intellectual argument against it. He called it the most unnatural way to get rich, and his logic was that money is barren. A seed can grow into a plant, an animal can have offspring, but a pile of coins, he argued, can't naturally create more coins. So making money from money itself felt like a perversion of what money was for.
But here's the thing. Despite all that moral outrage, lending has always been a practical necessity, right? So ancient legal systems didn't really try to ban it outright, they just tried to regulate it. As far back as 1750 BC, Hammurabi's code was setting maximum rates. Roman law did the same thing. And by 533 AD, the Code of Justinian was actually pretty sophisticated about it, setting different rate ceilings for different types of loans, because it recognized that a super risky loan for a sea voyage was different from a simple personal loan.
And that brings us right back to today. We've gone from seeing interest as this personal tug-of-war in your wallet to the Fed's main lever for steering the economy, all the way back to an ancient crime that was worthy of the deepest circle of hell. So what is it? Is it a vital tool for economic progress, or a practice with a really dark, morally complicated past? The wild thing is, after 4,000 years, that debate, in a lot of ways, is still very much alive.